sir.
Well, thank you very much, Charlie. I think you may be a little bit over-pessimistic in terms of anticipating presidential power will always ratchet itself up over time. So if you reflect the first 3 presidents in United States history, presided over extremely strong executive offices. Washington, Adams, Jefferson were by any measure very strong presidents, but between 1865 and 1933, I think it's safe to say that we lived in an era of congressional supremacy, and the presidencies were rather weak. So one can envision, at least in theory, a strong presidency giving way to a period of congressional ascendancy. It's not inevitable that presidential power will be embraced by succeeding administrations. But my question for you is a different one. It's very interesting to me that you set out to anticipate how Barack Obama might interpret executive authority based on his responses to your surveys. And perhaps my question is embarrassingly naive, but Barack Obama was a professor of constitutional law for 10 years. He said so the other night on TV. I haven't read his CV. I don't know how long he taught, but presumably he's published something. As a professor of constitutional law at Chicago, one would anticipate that someone publishes on constitutional law. Does he not have a record of publications addressing the issue of the balance of powers within the federal government and executive authority is placed within that balance? And also, I wouldn't read too much into Medellin, because Medellin also incorporates federalism into the balance.
Absolutely.
It's one thing for a relatively conservative judge to defer to state power. It's another for a relatively conservative judge to embrace international law or federal constitutional checks on executive authority.
So you made 3 points. I entirely agree with your point about Medellin and the conflicting notions of federalism versus executive power that came into play in that case. Your question about whether Barack Obama had published anything, I feel may be a rhetorical question, as he famously has not published anything.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh, this is one of the things that when the debate was whether he ought to be called a constitutional law professor when he is a senior instructor or something at the University of Chicago, and because he was in the state senate in Illinois, he's published nothing, literally nothing on anything. But his answers into the survey were quite detailed. And the question is just, is he going to stick to that? Can you trust a politician? Maybe you can. We'll see. We'll find out. It's going to be an interesting set of years here. But we're going to have another factor in play here. We're entering another period of one-party rule in Washington. And it doesn't matter whether it's the Republicans, as it was in the Bush years, or the Democrats, as we're going to have now, or as LBJ had in the 60s. When you have one-party rule in Washington, the constitutional structure breaks down. And we have this reverence for the Constitution as this sort of perfect document. The founders were geniuses. It's not. It is a flawed document. And one of the ways it is flawed is that the founders did not anticipate that we would have political parties. In the Federalist Papers, they specifically warned against factions. They wanted everyone to be sort of a free agent. And thus, if the executive pushed too hard, the self-interest of lawmakers would cause them to push back. But that's not what happened. In fact, we got political parties almost immediately. We have teams of politicians working together across state lines, across branches of government to control policy outcomes. And that means that when we have one-party rule, it sets up a conflict of interest, obviously. The leaders of Congress have their own leader, that is their party's leader. Their own interests are entwined. They need the party leader to do well so that they themselves will be returned to power. And that causes them not to push back when the White House goes too strongly, and it causes them to go easy on oversight. And so I expect we're not going to have a lot of oversight of the Obama years initially. What oversight we do have will probably be retrospective, looking back at the Bush years. And I expect that will allow problems to fester in the executive agencies. That may not be anything as sweeping as we've seen these last 8 years, but in general, strong oversight nips problems in the bud. And so that I'm firmly convinced we'll have that. As far as whether Obama himself will assert strong executive authority, it may be that he won't need to. It may be whatever he wants done, Congress will just sort of rubber stamp for him. One of the mysteries of the Bush years, on its surface, was why didn't he go to Congress more and just say, I want the following things, give them to me? Because they would have given it to him. And the solution to that, as Jack Goldsmith argues in the Terror Presidency, is what he should have done and would have avoided all of these fights, And the solution to that is that they didn't want to do that because they wanted to demonstrate that the president didn't need to go to Congress because of these long-term issues that dated back to the post-Watergate, post-Vietnam era. This is what I talk about, creating extra political difficulties for themselves in order to achieve their policy goals in a way that would also expand executive power. Obama's not going to have that agenda, so he may just go to Congress for everything, which may mean that on its surface he seems more accommodating, but in reality he's exercising just as much day-to-day power as he would otherwise. But that sort of brings me to the first thing you said was, is it true that executive power always ratchets? After the Civil War, it went down again. I think that the really relevant period is the modern era, which is FDR to the present, with standing armies, with America having this sort of hegemonic role in the world, with nuclear missiles and so forth. Now, even within that era, there was a period where it wasn't a steady escalation. There was the post-Vietnam, post-Watergate era, the Ford presidency and the Carter presidency. They sort of eroded away again by the Reagan presidency. But I think that exception proves the rule, because it shows how difficult it is to swing the balance back the other way, and how quickly those sort of forces dissipate and things sort of go back to where they were and then start ratcheting up again. All of the post-Watergate controls, almost all of them, had already eroded away by the end of the Clinton administration, with the exception really just of FISA. And then FISA went by the wayside within a year. I think the history of how this works is that presidents of both parties push the envelope, maybe not as systematically as this past one has done, maybe just when they have some specific policy goal they want to achieve, like Clinton and Kosovo. But they push the envelope, and then as far as they got it, that becomes the baseline for the next guy, and he pushes it a little bit more. And so much of this is the kind of thing that never gets into court, because no one has standing to sue over any of these sorts of questions most of the time. And that means that you're never going to get judicial resolution of any of these issues. And so an aggressive president who is willing to simply claim, I can do X and then do it, unless Congress is going to impeach him over that, he gets away with it. And that makes it all the easier for the next president, Office of Legal Counsel, to opine. It's well established we can do X because we've been doing X, and let's keep doing it some more. Or do it in these new instances, and this just keeps expanding and expanding and expanding. So I think, in fact, the one-way ratchet is the right way of looking at this. In the modern era, it's not a pendulum that goes back and forth. It is a ratchet that is much easier to increase than it is to roll back again. And even if you have a president who is comparatively modest for whatever reason, you have a Jimmy Carter who himself did some things that were not modest, but that doesn't erase the precedents that the previous more aggressive presidents have done. So immediately, sooner or later, we will have another aggressive president, and that person will be able to easily pick up where this administration is left off. Anyone else? All right, well, thank you very much, and it's been my pleasure, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Charlie, we have a small memento here of your time here at Washburn, and I hope you always remember us and return.
Thank you very much.